Welcome to the Tower Talk podcast, a place for honest and open conversations to support you in living your best life from the inside out. Join me on this journey of self-discovery as we explore what it means to reach next level badassery and cut through the BS. So tune in, stay a while, and I promise I'll be right here alongside you as we figure this shit out together. Think of this as a kind of part 2 segue into a recent solo episode I did on how to create your own workout program. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, scroll back to episode 34 and just give it a quick listen. That way you'll have all the base information needed to get the most out of this episode right here. So the main focus of this podcast is to help you understand what periodization is and how you may or may not want to implement it into your workout program. So today we're going to discuss what is periodization, how it works, why you would do it, the different types, and an easy way to add it in your program moving forward. So what is periodization? Periodization is the creation of a training program that spans the length of weeks, months, or sometimes years. And as the name suggests, periodization breaks down your training into periods of time devoted to specific outcomes, such as building strength, muscle, or power. Those periods of time can be viewed from a weekly, monthly, or annual perspective. But the power of periodization comes from stringing together several successful blocks or phases of training. Now, once you've made it through all of the newbie gains, concentrating your efforts is successive, synergistic, and progressively overloaded cycles. It's the best way to continue to see long-term progress. For example, say you are preparing for a powerlifting meet. You want to focus on heavy, low rep compound training in the month or two before the competition, so your muscles are primed for the demands of the meet. The month or two before that, however, you might do lighter, higher rep training with more accessory exercises to strengthen the same muscles that you would use for squat, bench, and deadlift. Hence, just right there, you are periodizing your training as you'd be working in different rep ranges, different exercises over 2 to 4 months with a specific goal in mind. Episode 31 goes into my very first powerlifting meet and how I trained for it the months leading up to it. So while there are many theories on the best way to periodize your weightlifting, the most viable ones are based on some simple principles. Number 1, your training involves progressive overload, and this can be in the form of more weight, sets, reps, faster pacing, longer distances, more complex movements, less rest, or some other activities. Episode 19 goes into progressive overload and how to make sure that you are lifting enough and seeing progress. So listen to that one. Number 2, your training shifts from less specific to more specific as you progress through the plan. With weightlifting, since competition usually involved very heavy weights for single reps, this principle means progressing from lighter weights and higher reps to heavier weights and lower reps. That less specific to the sport and then more specific to the sport as you get closer to actual meet day. And then number 3, your training includes breaks to allow for additional rest and recovery. Episode 23 goes into recovery and planning deload weeks. So learn way more about that in episode 23. There's going to be little nudges to listen to other episodes because I've gone in depth on a lot of these topics already, and I will continue to do so. When used correctly, this approach allows you to thread the needle between stress and recuperation by providing enough stimulus in the way that volume and weight to keep progressing, but not so much to actually have an injury, overtraining, or any burnout. And this is why athletes of all sports, including bodybuilders, powerlifting, gymnastics, cyclists, runners, swimming, basketball, football, soccer, and even golfers and surfers, they all use periodization in their training. A really great example of periodization is the upcoming Summer Olympics. They'll actually periodize their training for 4 years. So they would be on a full 4-year block. So periodization refers to how you organize your training over time. And periodized training involves splitting your training into different periods in which you focus on different aspects of your fitness. Most periodization systems are best suited for intermediate to advanced weightlifters, not beginners. This is really important to note because the episode that I did prior to this, episode 34 on how to write a workout plan, is very much geared to beginners. And when I was talking about those newbie gains, you'll see those up to a year or 2 years. And then once you get to that level, you kind of hit this plateau. And so that's where this periodization can come into play. So again, if you haven't listened to that episode 34 goes into a beginner, how to write a workout plan, stick with it, stay consistent, and then this is the episode for you. So how does periodization work? To understand how it works, I did a little bit of research to grasp on what the history behind periodization is. And this is early 1950s by a Hungarian endocrinologist named Hans Selye. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He developed a theory on how we respond to stress known as the general adaptation syndrome, which states that the body responds to stress, including exercise, in 3 different phases. The first phase is alarm. This is where the body initially responds to the stressor. This is an increased heart rate, stress hormones, etc. Adaptation is when the body recovers and gets stronger if given enough rest. And exhaustion, where the body fails to recover and gets weaker because of too little rest. And as an athlete or someone who just hopes to get more jacked over time, you want to repeatedly alarm your body and then allow it to adapt while staying away from that exhaustion phase. We don't want any of that as much as possible. Inspired by his findings, there was a Russian physiologist named Leo Matveyev. He began analyzing the training programs of successful and unsuccessful Soviet athletes from 1952 to 1956 Summer Olympics. He found that either deliberately or accidentally, the most successful athletes in the variety of sports trained according to that theory, the alarm, adaptation, exhaustion. They pushed themselves to become stronger, faster, and more skilled, often to the limits of their ability, and then reduce training intensity or volume for more rest and recovery. So this physiologist organized and codified these practices, creating a system we now know and will get into more called linear periodization. With weightlifters, this approach called for increasing intensity and decreasing volume as they approached their competitions with planned breaks throughout to avoid overtraining. And so outside of the history, in most cases, training is broken up into 3 distinct phases or periods. First, you have your longest phase. You might have heard this before in your life. It's called the macro cycle. The macro cycle is a long-term view centered around preparing for a particular event or improving body composition or even physical conditioning. So let's just say you're a recreational weightlifter. This generally means you're setting a new personal record. You are gaining muscle or you are losing fat. This can also be for runners, for cyclers, if they have a certain event or specific thing in mind. Macro cycles can last anywhere from a few months to several years, depending on the activity, individual, and their goals. In bodybuilding and traditional strength training, they typically last between 3 and 6 months. A lot of the programming that I do is around 3 months. The second longest phase is a mesocycle. The mesocycle focuses on developing a particular skill or quality, so muscle growth, strength, etc. Sometimes I'll have people on a squat and pull-up phase, maybe a deadlift and bench, and we're really focusing on that within the mesocycle. That usually lasts between 1 to 4 months. So in bodybuilding, there are a couple of mesocycles, typically within a macrocycle. The shortest phase is a microcycle. And it's typically defined as a several-day period of vigorous training followed by a short period of lighter training or rest, often called a deload week. For example, say you train 4 days a week, you take 3 days off. That is an example of a microcycle. It normally compromises a week worth of training, but some people use shorter or longer microcycles. Okay, so why would we periodize our training? By the way, try and say periodization. Like, it's a hard word to say. The main reason people periodize their training is that it helps them move better, move faster, more consistent, and they can see their progress rather than non-periodized training. When a client of mine or an athlete first begins with their weightlifting journey, like maybe that's you out there, your progress is, I'm going to put this in quotes, easy. And especially if you're following a well-designed workout program, You can literally show up to the gym a few times a week, maybe get a couple more reps, maybe lift a little bit more weight than the last time, and you will see results over time. Again, those beginner gains are awesome, but it can go like this for like 6 months, year, maybe a year and a half. And there are two main reasons for this honeymoon phase, is what we call it as a newbie. You'll hear the terms newbie gains or honeymoon phase or beginner gains, something like that.
Hey talkers, are you ready for a boost with your fitness journey? Use code TerraTalk to save 20% off your first order of Legion, aka your new best friend for high quality supplements. Now, why is Legion the best? Because whether you're aiming to feel stronger, more energized, or just a little more badass every day, Legion's got you. Their products nourish your body and enhance your performance without any unnecessary fillers or fluff, and it's backed by real deal scientific research. Plus, they taste so good, you'll actually look forward to chugging down your protein shake. I know I do. And they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. What's not to love about that? So, what are you waiting for? Embrace the journey to becoming the best version of yourself with Legion Athletics by your side. Head over to their website now and use code TerraTalk for 20% off your first order and double loyalty cashback on every order after. Your support through Legion helps keep the podcast as a free source of content, so your support really does matter. So head on over to Legion and enjoy the rest of the show.
When you're new to weightlifting, your body is primed to gain muscle and strength quickly. That is a fact. So if you are really consistent with your training, you should see some super solid progress in the first 4 to 6 months of your training. I know some of you might hear 4 to 6 months and you're like, that's a long time. It's not in the grand scheme of things. Strength training is just doing the same exercises over and over again until you die. And then the second reason is that the weights that you're lifting usually aren't heavy enough to pose any major risk of injury. So this honeymoon phase is really great until you get to that point where you can lift a lot more and you actually push yourself even more. But these newbie gains only last for so long, however, and eventually come to an end. And then you, my friends, are in your intermediate phase. I honestly go from intermediate to advanced all the time, just based on where I'm at in life and cycle and all the things. So at this point, when you hit this intermediate phase, progress does slow down dramatically. Think of your squat. You can't just add 10 pounds in your squat every week, week over week for the rest of your life, right? But if you can, maybe for the first 6 months to a year, and then you're going to eventually hit a plateau where maybe you're not gaining any more muscle or any strength just anymore. And so you hit that like wall. And so many people who get their first case of this like plateau simply respond by just like training harder. I need to get past that. And so you might train to failure more often. Maybe you do more sets. Maybe you do harder variations or bigger rep schemes. And this can kind of get you out of the weeds, but it also starts to take a toll on your body in the form of maybe achy joints and tendons. Maybe your motivation is lacking. Maybe you have impaired sleep. And this is like all symptoms of overtraining. So some other people respond to a plateau in their training by just being complacent. So you kind of either just keep showing up to the gym, but just go through the motions. Maybe you add a little bit of weight here and there when you feel good, and you just remove weight when you don't. This allows you to maintain a lot of the muscle and strength, but it kind of halts you on making any progress moving forward. Periodization is an effective way to avoid some of those pitfalls. Does periodization make you gain strength and muscle? Last episode was all about beginner workout plans. I give you examples and how to start your plan. So maybe you're in your early honeymoon phase of strength training and you can save this specific episode for later on. But for instance, if you're new to lifting, all you need is simple, linear style of periodization that has you striving to gain reps, add weight to the bar each week for a couple months before deloading and repeat. You can really do that for a while. And remember, when you are a beginner, your body is primed to build muscle. So basic programming is all you need to maximize your muscle gain. So some of the stuff that I'm talking about now with some of this advanced training and periodization might actually be a distraction for you. But after your first year or two of that kind of style of training, the game does change and more complex periodization plan does make more sense. There was a study that I found by scientists at Appalachian State University that analyzed 15 studies comparing periodization training to non-periodized plans. The research found that 13 of the 15 cases, people got stronger or improved their performance with a more periodized plan versus a non-periodized one. There are many different ways and many opinions on what way is the best way. So let me just go over some of them, and maybe this will spark some interest in how you might want to utilize it in your training. First, there is linear periodization. This involves increasing intensity, which is weight, and usually reducing volume, which is sets, over the course of your macro cycle. Reverse linear periodization is like linear, except each macro cycle starts with heavier weights and less volume and progresses to lighter weights and more volume. Here's one you may or may not have heard. Undulating periodization involves changing the weights, the reps, and the sets you use day to day or week to week, but not necessarily the exercises. Block periodization focuses on a handful of exercises for one mesocycle, generally a month or two. This is a big one that I use personally. Conjugate periodization involves changing your exercises, weights, reps, and sets day to day or week to week. This is similar to undulating periodization, but a little bit more haphazard. Each of these systems involve increasing weights lifted over time, and usually according to a regular pattern, like every workout or week, for instance. But they do have different names and protocols. They're more alike than different in that each follows the same principles we learned earlier. Remember, progressive overload in the form of more weights, sets, and reps. Number one. Number two, increasing specificity as you progress on the plan by moving from maybe lighter weights and heavy reps to heavier weights and lower reps, or vice versa, depending on what that periodization is. And then planning breaks to allow for rest and recovery. Remember, deload weeks are so valuable and so important to see progress. But also, each method has inherent advantages and disadvantages. So instead of marrying yourself to one, it's probably best to use different styles, in which case I do a lot with my clients and myself. Maybe one type will work with one client and one will work with the other. It's all just data. Remember, all data is good data. So, what is the easiest way to use periodization to gain muscle and strength? Because a lot of you come to me to this podcast to be bigger, more badass version of yourself. So, first of all, remember, if you are brand new to lifting weights, you do not need to use a fancy periodization system. Instead, you just need to do that well-designed workout routine that has you adding weights or reps. You decide, and then deloading every 6 to 8 weeks whenever you hit a plateau. Almost all of my clients work this way, where we hit that plan for 4 to 6 weeks and then either hit a deload then or hit a deload after the second plan. But here's a simple way to periodize your compound lifts. Now, you can do this with your isolation lifts as well, but let's stick with the basic compound lifts. Remember we talked about this in a previous episode as well. Compound lifts, multi-muscle, multi-joint, squat, bench, deadlift, pull-up, rows, etc. So each mesocycle can be 4 to 6 weeks, with the last week being a deload. So if you would just want to envision this, you can have your mesocycle or your block of training be 4 to 6 weeks, and then the last week of that training can be your deload week. Now, you can do 1 to 2 compound exercises per workout and 3 to 4 sets per exercise. I like to start people off on their first week on an RPE 6 or 7. Each week, you want to increase the intensity by about 5 to 10% and reduce each set by about 2 reps or so. I personally love to give rep ranges when it comes to your program, so you can actually mess around with the ranges. And then you want to continue to increase the weight and reduce the reps in a fashion for a total of 3 to 5 weeks. On the 4th or 5th week, you can just do 2 sets with 85% of your 1 rep max. If you don't know what your 1 rep max is, you can just find a really easy calculator online. And then also with that 4th or 5th week, on the first set, you can do an AMRAP, which is as many rounds as possible. And then you want to take that set to failure, doing as many reps as you can before your form starts to break down. Then you're going to use that 1 rep max calculator to calculate your new estimated 1 rep max based on how many reps you got on your AMRAP set. So for example, if you started a mesocycle with, let's just say, a 225-pound 1 rep max squat and then got 8 reps for 190 on your AMRAP set, your new 1 rep max just by the calculator alone would be 235. You can also calculate your working weights like this for your next mesocycle based on your new 1 rep maxes. So really great way to kind of test out what your percentage should be and utilize that for your next cycle as well. Okay, so here are just a couple more notes on how to make this periodization system work better for you. Feel free to swap any exercises every 6 to 8 weeks or so. You do not need to change your exercises if you're making really good progress. It is a good idea if you're getting bored. I'm the type of person that can see the same plan for 4, 6, 8 weeks in a row, but I do know that there's a lot of people that can get bored. So I recommend you stick with exercises similar to those in your previous mesocycle. For example, maybe you can do front squats instead of back squats, or high bar versus low bar squats. Maybe you're doing a incline press instead of a bench press. You can also lower your estimated 1 rep max if you're consistently missing the reps. This was really frustrating for me when I was doing my powerlifting meet. I had this 1 rep max in mind and I was consistently not hitting those. So I actually had to lower it, but it actually allowed me to get stronger. So if you find yourself regularly failing any sort of number, prescribed, like the prescribed reps in your workouts, just reduce the amount of weight by maybe like 5%. And I promise you will get stronger later on. All right. So at the end of the day, periodization is a method of organizing your training that involves emphasizing different aspects of your fitness at different times. The main reason why people periodize their training programs is that it allows you to effectively balance stress and recovery. You gradually push yourself closer and closer to your limits before backing off and giving yourself that time to recover. And periodization can actually help you gain muscle and strength faster after you pass those newbie gains. The best kind of periodization just depends on how experienced of a weightlifter you are. And remember, all data is good data. And if you're new to lifting weights and you're right past those newbie gains, a simple linear periodization is all you need to optimize your strength and muscle gains. And one easy practical way that you can do this today is by working with a handful of really solid exercise and trying to add weights or reps on the bar every week for several weeks in a row. And so if you're hearing all of this and got a little confused, I got you. I write programs for my clients to make sure that they're always seeing progress, and we check in to see what changes need to be made. You can apply to work with me in the link in my show notes, and I cannot wait to hear what you think about this episode. Please make sure that you tag at Tara LaFerrera and at the Tara Talk. If you have any questions, just shoot me a DM. Tara Talk. Thanks for coming to this Tara Talk. I hope you're taking something away from this episode, and if so, I would love to hear about it. You can connect with me at the Tara Talk and at Tara LaFerrera on Instagram. A few ways you can help support the show and help spread the word. You can share it on Instagram, tag at the Tara Talk and at Tara LaFerrera. Send an episode to a friend, and please leave a review if the show is resonating with you. It takes just a few minutes, and it means so much to help this show grow, and it helps me to continue to bring on badass guests for all of us to learn and grow from. I am so happy you're here and excited to be on this journey with you. Until next time, be a badass with a good ass.